the crown, an entity synonymous with power, tradition, and unwavering stability. But what happens when the very foundations upon which that power rests begin to crumble? What happens when the carefully constructed narrative, meticulously guarded for centuries, starts to unravel thread by thread? The answer, as the House of Windsor would soon discover, is a reckoning unlike any they had ever faced. It began, as these things often do, with a whisper, a rustling in the archives, a digital ghost escaping its confines. Not a hacking, not a hostile act, but something far more insidious, a leak. A betrayal from within the ancient walls of Buckingham Palace, a calculated release of information that threatened to shatter the carefully curated image of the royal family. Imagine the scene, a nondescript office tucked away behind the palace chapel. Senior aides, faces etched with concern, huddle around a table, the air thick with unspoken anxieties. The phrase, "protect the institution," hangs heavy in the air, a mantra repeated with increasing desperation. They knew instinctively that this was not just another scandal to be weathered. This was an existential threat. The document, cryptically titled "The Record You Buried," contained details of an arrangement made decades prior, a clandestine agreement involving finances, titles, and the very lineage of the royal family, a secret so explosive that its revelation could call into question the legitimacy of the monarchy itself. News of the leak reached King Charles at Windsor Castle. The message, delivered with hushed urgency by his private secretary, spoke of recovered documents from the royal archives. The king, initially puzzled, soon grasped the gravity of the situation. The royal household, a well-oiled machine of protocol and tradition, descended into what one aide later described as a quiet crisis. While the world outside remained blissfully unaware, the palace became a pressure cooker of clandestine meetings, frantic phone calls, and desperate attempts at damage control. Advisors were summoned, servers were checked, and every possible avenue of containment was explored. Yet, the more they searched, the clearer it became that this was not an external attack. The breach had come from within, orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of the palace's darkest secrets. Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, were quickly briefed. The meeting was short, the tone clipped, but the message was clear. The situation was sensitive, but manageable. William, ever the pragmatist, knew better. "It's never manageable once they say that," he confided to Catherine, a chilling premonition of the chaos to come. Catherine, a keen observer of the royal game, understood the gravity of the situation. She had learned that the most dangerous crises were not the loud, public ones, but the silent, insidious ones that festered beneath the surface. And this, she knew, was one of the latter. As darkness fell over London, a fragmented, redacted file began circulating among a select group of journalists. It hinted at a decision made in the late 1980s, an arrangement that involved the quiet reshaping of royal lineage. It suggested that one of the family's most fundamental truths was in fact a carefully constructed lie. The implications were staggering. An inheritance rewritten, a bloodline adjusted to protect an image, an heir named not by birthright, but by convenience. If verified, this story would not only stain reputations, it would rewrite history. Fleet Street, the heart of British journalism, was about to be plunged into chaos. The first whispers of the royal revelation reached newsrooms, igniting a frenzy of speculation and investigation. Editors, seasoned veterans of countless scandals, struggled to discern fact from fabrication. But those who had glimpsed the document knew this was no mere fabrication. This was a carefully concealed truth about to explode onto the world stage. In Windsor, King Charles convened a private meeting with his most trusted advisors. The conversation was civil, measured, but beneath the surface lay a palpable sense of alarm. Lord Chamberlain, the head of the royal household, stressed the urgency of confirming the extent of the exposure and identifying the source of the leak before the press did. Torres, a man who had inherited the throne in an age of unprecedented transparency, had spent a lifetime guarding secrets that transparency could destroy. The question that hung heavy in the air, what if the story is true? The answer, delivered with solemn finality by the Lord Chamberlain, was chilling. They must decide whether the truth serves the crown or ends it, a question of unimaginable weight, a choice between upholding tradition and facing the consequences of deception. That evening, Catherine found herself alone in her study. The early reports of the scandal, now dubbed the Windsor file, spread across her desk. She meticulously analyzed each article, noting the omissions, the redactions, the subtle hints that the journalists were closing in on the full story. She understood the rules of the game: discretion above disclosure, grace above confrontation. But now she saw the true fear that gripped the monarchy, not the scandal itself, but the consequences that would inevitably follow. William entered, his face drawn, the weight of the crown already pressing down on his shoulders. He confessed that the story was breaking faster than they anticipated, that denial would no longer suffice. Catherine, her voice barely a whisper, asked the question that haunted them both. Do you believe it's true? William hesitated, his answer carefully chosen. I believe that the truth in this family has always depended on who's allowed to speak it. A damning indictment of a system built on secrets and controlled narratives. As thunder rolled across the London sky, a storm far greater than the weather was brewing. The headlines the next morning were relentless: royal secret exposed, legacy rewritten, the truth finally comes out. Public reaction was divided. Some dismissed it as mere speculation, a desperate attempt to tarnish the monarchy. Others demanded transparency, a full accounting of the past. But beneath the outrage, a deeper emotion resonated: heartbreak. The monarchy had always been Britain's mirror, reflecting its history, its resilience, its illusions of permanence. But now, as the truth spread like ink through water, that mirror began to crack, revealing the flaws and imperfections that had been hidden for so long. The palace remained silent, a fortress of tradition under siege. Lawyers drafted statements that would never be released, courtiers whispered in corners, and the weight of centuries pressed down on those within the gilded walls. The whisper that had started it all had become a roar, threatening to engulf everything in its path. And for the first time in modern memory, the royal family realized that the danger wasn't what the public thought, but what the public might finally understand. The morning after the story broke, Buckingham Palace became a theater of controlled chaos. Corridors that usually echoed with quiet precision now hummed with unease. Aides hurried between rooms, their expressions composed, but their pace betraying panic. The palace press office released a brief, sterile statement. We are aware of recent media reports and will not be commenting on unverified material. It was the kind of denial that confirmed more than it concealed. In the communications room, screens glowed with live feeds from across the world. Every network carried the same story. Anchors spoke with reverence and caution. Historians speculated and legal analysts debated implications none dared name aloud. Somewhere in the din, a phrase repeated again and again: the monarchy's greatest secret. Inside Windsor, the king sat at his desk, the leaked file before him. The document itself was slim, only 8 pages, but each line carried enough weight to shake foundation. It referenced a confidential adjustment to succession recognition authorized quietly after the passing of a former royal advisor. The phrasing was careful, clinical, but its meaning was devastating. It implied that a generation earlier, a decision had been made to obscure a paternal link, to rewrite an inheritance in order to prevent scandal. Charles's fingers trembled slightly as he turned the pages. He knew fragments of this story, of course. Every monarch inherited ghosts, but not its full scope. If the details were true, they meant that the family line, the very legitimacy of certain titles, rested on deception. The question was not whether the crown could survive the revelation, but whether it deserved to. By midday, William was summoned. The meeting took place in the king's private study with no aides present. The air was heavy with unspoken history. Charles gestured to the file on the table. "You've read it?" he asked. "Only the parts they've made public," William said. "And what do you believe?" "That belief doesn't matter," William replied quietly. "Proof does." Charles leaned back. "There will be those who say this changes everything. And there will be those," William said, "who realize it only reveals what was always true." Outside the study, the machinery of crisis management churned relentlessly. Legal advisors drafted statements, archivists combed through decades of correspondence, and digital specialists traced the leak. The investigation was discreet but merciless. Every file accessed, every password used, every clearance granted was logged and reviewed. Yet the more they searched, the clearer it became that the breach had come from inside. That evening, Catherine arrived at Windsor with the children. The public needed to see unity, the advisors had said. But unity was no longer strategy, it was camouflage. After dinner, when the children had gone upstairs, she found herself alone in the garden with the king. The lamps cast long shadows across the gravel path. They say the truth came from the archives, she said. Then the past has finally decided to speak. Charles looked at her, tired but resolute. The past always speaks, he murmured. We just pretend not to hear it. The next morning, a second leak surfaced. An addendum to the file that mentioned payments made to a private trust in the early 990s. The sums were small enough to seem benign, but their timing raised questions. It was clear now that this was not a single oversight, it was a pattern. News outlets ran with it, linking the findings to earlier rumors of royal cover-ups and missing records. Commentators who had once defended the crown began to ask difficult questions. The institution that had survived wars and divorces was now fighting something far more corrosive: doubt. William's aides begged him to release a statement distancing himself from the matter, but he refused. "If I speak now," he said, "it will look like defense. Let the truth stand on its own." Catherine watched him from across the room. His restraint, once his strength, now felt like quiet punishment. He was bearing the shame of a secret he hadn't created.